Yeah. All right. So it is 8:30. So I just will introduce myself. If you don't know who I am, I'm Karen Stanton. Excuse me, I'm the coordinator for Western Academy. And welcome to our second day of the 2023 Winter Conference. Richard, you can take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Ashley Sequeira, who works at Google as a technical sales program lead for security. And Ashley's a community college graduate and presently adjunct faculty at Boise State and Sacramento City College. And before Google, Ashley worked at Palo Alto Networks for 4.5 years and is an Army veteran. Thank you for your service, Ashley. Ashley's amazing bio is posted on the WASTC conference page, but there's a feature article that I saw about Ashley and her story on the National Cybersecurity Alliance website. The title of the article is From Math Hater to DevCon Lover, an Unlikely Path to Cybersecurity. I'm anxious to hear more. Please welcome Ashley Sequeira.
Thanks so much, Richard, and Happy New Year, everyone. Can't believe we've all made it to 2023, so we'll just start from there. Really excited to be here. This feels like things have really come full circle because, as Richard mentioned, I got my start at a community college, and it's just so crazy to be a teacher at a community college and to be keynoting for people that taught me and helped me get to where I am. So I do want to make some shout outs to some of the life changers because I think some of you might be on the phone today. So of course, my amazing husband who has put up with all of my stubbornness and ridiculous plans and schemes and has really just been an awesome support for everything that's happened. So thank you if you're on, my darling. Professor Monson gets a big shout out because he is the first person that showed me a Palo Alto firewall. And literally, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been prepared for something later that I'll tell you in my story that actually ended up helping me get a job. So thank you so much, Sean. Professor Anderson, I couldn't forget you. He was just this technical powerhouse at Sac City College. And I think I had to work the hardest and learned the most in his classes, specifically this really hard ethical hacking class he taught. Dr. Gilbert Valencia, I hope he's on. He was actually American River College, but he was kind of my academic mentor for a very long time. And of course, very dear Kim Yohannan. We met at Palo Alto Networks and she's the reason I'm here today. So thank you so much, Kim. I appreciate you like more than you'll ever understand, that's for sure. So let's talk about kind of this past, present, future thing. So my past was kind of crazy. If you read my bio and you see all the great things I've done, you'd never know that I was technically homeless, couch surfing. I had $6 in my bank account at one point. I remember trying to, when I met my husband, he tried to take me to lunch and I wouldn't even let him pay for my tacos. And I still had $6. Like I was so stubborn. I would not let him pay for those tacos. And I couldn't configure a firewall. Like I had some Army training, so there was some Cisco in there, some basic networking, but I was just not prepared for the current job market. And, I joined the military out of high school. Unfortunately, my dad had a lot of health challenges. My mom struggled with addiction. So there was just a lot of stuff that, if it had not happened, I think there'd be some changes as far as like how I would have probably gotten to the same path, but the computer was an escape for me. The early internet was an escape for me. I was looking for cheat codes for Super Nintendo and all kinds of ridiculous stuff. And so I think in the back of my mind, I always knew I'd end up in security, but there really wasn't like a clear path at that point. So I joined the military and I told some of our hosts this story earlier, but I actually joined the Army as a linguist. And I had jump school and all the crazy, nonsense in my contract that I was at boot camp and they gave away my school slot. And if you've served in the military, if you lose a school slot or if they make any changes when you're still in initial entry, it can mess your contract up. So they gave me the choice. They said I could go home. They said I could change jobs. They said I could change components. So that opened up the option for the reserves. So I joined the reserve instead. And I actually ended up in the band, but it was so funny because I'm looking through jobs because I knew I wanted to go back to school. And I'm like, well, what can I do? And I'm looking down the little chart. And I'm like, this says trumpet player. Is that a thing? And it really was. And so I did a field audition, and I was in the Army band for 6 years. And a lot of people don't know it's a real job. My husband still thinks I'm a spy. He didn't think that I was a real person that could be in the band. Well, the economy crashed, and I actually started at American River as an English major. Thought I was going to be a lawyer, save the world, that kind of thing. And I worked really hard because I had a terrible high school GPA, and I got into UC Berkeley. I actually got into UC Berkeley, and I get there, and it's not a fit. I was miserable on campus. I didn't have a lot of support. I wasn't too far from my family because I'm a Sacramento native, but it was just really tough to kind of make that adjustment. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. I figured out once I got there. So I got my Security Plus because while I was there, I actually got the Army to retrain me, and I was able to retrain in IT. So I had my Security Plus. I decided that I wanted to switch to IT. So I went to the IT school, graduated with honors, all this fun stuff. And I was the only person from my class that had a job lined up when I got home. So I actually started off at Asus Computer doing RMAs. So if you've ever ordered a motherboard for any of you gamers out there and something's wrong with it and you have to send it back, I was on that team that had to test it and look at it and make sure that there was actually something wrong with it. And then we'd send you a new one or send it back and make repairs, whatever. Well, it actually really was just me getting screamed at on the phone all day. Like, I didn't get to fix a lot. I just got yelled at. I started asking around to like some of my colleagues, and I found out that I was getting paid the least and I had to commute the farthest. And so it was just a really frustrating thing because I was commuting from Sacramento to Fremont every day for like $16 an hour. Was not worth it. Didn't want to do it anymore. So I started trying to do some more research and figure out how to like leverage that Sec Plus because it's an entry level cert, but not a lot of people, like if you could spell security, you could get a job in 2015. It was really weird. So I ended up at Modesto City Schools for a while, and I did the help desk, and I found out with the K through 12 IT jobs, because a lot of them are union, you can't really cross train. And I had other interests and I couldn't really explore those interests. And I was also still commuting kind of far. And then I got laid off like 2 days before I was supposed to be at like a year, which was, it stunk, it wasn't fun, but I had a job lined up with Folsom Cordova. So I went to Folsom Cordova and making more money, doing some cool things, kind of still the same limitations, but I was in a really bad relationship and I ended up having to leave. It was a domestic violence situation. So I had to leave all the way. I ended up in Oakland. And while I was in Oakland, I was part of a resident athlete program for Taekwondo. And I had done Taekwondo all through high school, did Taekwondo a little bit in college. I was actually captain of the team in, I think, 2010, 2011. Made it to nationals, made national team, all that stuff. So I went to that resident athlete program, and they had just made an adjustment to the rules for the Olympics. And so I had a good chance that if I pushed and I did well and fought that whole year, I could actually probably make it to trials. So I did everything I was supposed to do. I won collegiate nationals. I won nationals. I went to the military Olympics a second time. I won an international open. Like, I did all this really cool stuff. 2015, the end of the year gets here. We're supposed to find out about selection. They go, hey, guess what? We changed the rules. You're not eligible now. So I was just done. And that's why I ended up with $6 in my checking account because amateur sports are not cheap. I was flying all over the world, traveling everywhere, entry fees, all that stuff. So tail between my legs, I go back to Sacramento. I transferred Army units and I ended up in an instructor unit. And I actually had lined up a job with Apple, which is hilarious because it's Apple. It's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go work at Apple, whatever. So I was working at the call center that's in Elk Grove for Apple Care, but it was money. My dad was sick, so I could be a little closer to home, but I was still kind of couch surfing because I was so stubborn. I didn't want to go home. And I met my husband, my now husband, and he told my stubborn self, it's like, hey, go home, get your feet under you, like, do all these other things, and like, let's go from there. And so the couldn't configure a firewall thing came up because he and I were talking, and he's like, what certs do you have? I'm like, well, I have Sec Plus. And he's like, well, do you know firewalls? I'm like, oh, they're kind of my weakest area. Like I knew that. And I was getting ready to actually take the firewall class with Professor Monson that following semester. So Sean, you'll come up here in just a second. So I, hanging out with my awesome husband, Dan, and this, again, we're still just dating. And our first away trip was to DEF CON. Like I already knew I was going to marry this dude because I'm like, who takes someone to a hacking conference for their first away trip? And obviously he does. And that's like, oh, the light bulb. I figured out like, hey, security is like the thing. It's actually like a job now. I did use the Bureau of Labor website to kind of look at like job trends and things like that. And IT and cybersecurity were just like shooting to the moon. And so I knew, I was like, hey, this makes sense. Like I'm going to go for this. And so that's how I re-enrolled at Sac City College. So I already had like 3 associate's degrees, but they were all in like English and liberal arts, which there's nothing wrong with that because my job now has me writing and communicating and presenting, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without that first foundation. But Sac City is where I really got that tech and got exposed to a program that was aligned with what was happening in the industry currently, because that's always the fear for students is that you're going to take a program and they're teaching you Windows 7 when we're out here on Windows 11. Like that's always the fear. And so that didn't happen, and so Professor Anderson's class, Professor Monson's class, that firewall class is the one that stuck with me the most because something that Sean said was, Palo Alto, like their products are so good. And if you can get certified in Palo Alto, like you're going to get a job because you really know your stuff. And I never forgot that. So fast forward, I get a SOC job, believe it or not. And this is after leaving Folsom Cordova, leaving Apple. I was at Sandia Laboratories and I actually got to do a little bit of vulnerability management. And that was kind of my first taste of, oh, okay, so there's different kind of avenues and pipes and things within security. And I knew right then, I was like, okay, I don't want to work in the public sector. I want to go like private sector. I want to do like security analysis work, like for a bigger organization. And for those of you that don't know what the SOC is, the Security Operations Center. So a SOC analyst, you've probably heard that. That's what that means. So I get to my first working in a SOC, like looking at alerts, sunglasses on indoors with techno music blaring in the background security job. And I worked graveyards, and my dear friend Dimitri, who I got into Palo Alto before I left, we would be like threat hunting and we were just so into it and it was just everything we wanted. But then we start looking at salaries. I'm like, bro, are we making 50K? Like, this is crazy because we're protecting the business. So my other peer, who's now my technical mentor in cybersecurity, former NSA, really smart guy, keeps it close to the cuff, but I figure out later he's a veteran also. And he goes, hey, I went to this really cool training with Palo Alto Networks. Have you heard of them? I'm like, oh yeah, I took a firewall class with them. Well, it was a free training. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But it was in Santa Clara and I was working in Sacramento and I was a contractor. So as a contractor, my manager at the time said I could go, but they weren't going to pay me for the week. And, Dan and I, of course, we had bought a house, and our first house, like, I'll have to have a whole keynote on how not to buy a house the first time because that first house was a nightmare. So we were just like strapped for cash. And I talked to him and I was like, hey, I really want to go to this training. Work's not going to pay me. I'm going to have to stay in like some sketchy Motel 6. But I'm going to try to go because I think this could lead to like hopefully improving, what's going on with jobs. And so he was like, you know what, I support you. Like, yeah, it's going to be tough, but like, you should go. So I go to this training and, it was a great training. A vet was leading it. And because I already knew the firewall, because that class was so good, I was able to help my classmates. And I'm totally one of those people that loves to help. I always try to like offer support where I can because I know everyone's at different places. And so on like Wednesday night of that 5-day training, I get an email. And it's from the instructor who's now a friend of mine, Mitch. And he says, hey, we have an opening on our team. Do you want to apply? And I like shut my laptop because I was in shock. Like I couldn't believe that actually came through in an email. And I sent my resume back and I had a kind of a phone screen with one of the managers. They interviewed me. So December 2017, I concluded my work in the SOC. And by February 2018, I was working full time at Palo Alto Networks and it was remote. I could not believe it. I was like, wow, like the first day I get up and I'm still in sweatpants and I open my laptop and I'm like, I'm working remotely now. This is great. This is great. So I started as a technical trainer and that's how I met Kim. And, you know, I was still really green and they took a chance on me and I'll never not be appreciative of that because I knew enough to be dangerous, but I needed a lot more help. And they mentored, they pushed, you know, I got trained. I've got for those of you who know the acronyms, I did get my PCNSE, that hard engineering firewall cert. I got the SC. Before I left, I had the Cortex XDR, which is like the endpoint protection cert. I had the security automation cert. And like, these are things are just like, even now I'm like, I can't believe I have an automation cert. I could barely print hello world in Python like 6 years ago. And I'm over here leading training and you know, delivering content to the point where my classes were so full, the wait list would be also full. And I had people emailing me, begging me to take my classes. And so we get to the present. And so here we are, you know, I went from being a terrible high school student and a UC Berkeley dropout to being a master's candidate. I'll be graduating in May from Boise State. I'm at freaking Google, like the place that I got the invite to in my email back in 2003, 2004, you know. I'm now part of the security B-Sides event in Las Vegas. I help with like the physical security and safety operations, which again, I went to one conference and had networked my way into being on staff at B-Sides. And I gooned at DEF CON this year. So if you've ever gone to DEF CON and see the people in red shirts, I was a red shirt person. Like, I can't believe this is my life right now. I just got admitted to SANS. And so I'm now working on a graduate certificate with SANS. And again, these are things that weren't even possible because I had $6 in my checking account 7 years ago. And of course, I'm an Army vet. And one of the things I love is that within Palo Alto Networks, I was running the Veterans Employee Resource Group. So again, like just things that if you had told me at 14, Ashley, I know you're messing up right now, but it's going to all work out. I promise. I wouldn't have believed you. So what does our future look like? So it's up to us. Like part of the reason I love being an adjunct is because we get to fight for the future of our students every single day. Every single day. You know, we fight for better curriculum. I'm sure Sean fought for, hey, we need to update our firewall curriculum from being port and protocol to being next gen. And this is why we have to fight for their outcomes. We have to fight for them being able to even have access to these things that didn't even exist 5-10 years ago. So as far as moving forward, like it's up to us too, to kind of help drive that stuff. So updating your skills, staying up to date. Like, I know it's hard. There's so much. It changes in seconds. Like I just got another notification about some other breach today. You know, it's going to keep going. But as long as we're fighting that fight, I think we're going to help make that impact for other community college students and other students in general to really help them try to solve some of these problems that we're experiencing within cybersecurity and tech in general. So I'm super social. So if you want to network with me, I'm going to leave this up here for just a second. You know, I really do appreciate just being here in general. Again, I want to thank my husband. He's actually like hanging out now, loitering, listening to me because I don't think the Zoom wasn't working for him. But I love you so much and thank you. But yeah, I guess I have a couple of minutes. Do we want to do the Q&A now, or do we want to still save that for later? So I did save about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, there's time to do Q&A. There is a Q&A section, or we can take them from the chat as well. Karen, maybe you can see if there's anything there.
And
Richard,
please don't be shy.
I don't see anything in the Q&A, but I'm not sure we let people know.
The chat has been blowing up though, so that's pretty amazing. You have a lot of fans out there. You have Sean and Kevin are both on.
Oh, yay. Hi.
Yeah.
Get to virtually see both of you.
So yeah, put any questions you have in the Q&A, and then I'll shoot them over to yeah. Nope, so far nothing, but lots of really fantastic comments. Everyone's loving this keynote.
There are no questions. Well, obviously my favorite color is orange. So that just,
We
that
do.
breaks the ice.
I do have a question here. Have you had students in your past giving you more inspiration? Do your students inspire you, I think?
Yeah, between the martial arts and then just working at a community college, like absolutely. When I was still teaching, because I took a step away from competing and then I started coaching, I was coaching in Lodi and Stockton, and some of those kids have been through, I'm just going to say, they've been through hell, and they're still trying to do better. They're still trying to be better. One of my kids, I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to, privacy reasons, but both of his parents are in jail. And when I met him, he was not passing school. He was struggling. He didn't think education was important. And, we spent some time, we got to know each other. And now he's like, I want to go to college. Like, I want to do all this great stuff. And so, like, he inspires me every day because I can't imagine not having any kind of like support from like parental figures and still even wanting to kind of push through and break that cycle.
Cool. We have a couple more questions now. And this is from Rupa. Any hints on how to keep up with technology and deciding which new tech to follow or learn, as from a community college professor?
So as far as keeping up, I do think that there's some benefit to spreading out the wealth as far as specializing. It's really hard to keep up with everything. There's just too much going on. But let's say like you're really big into networking. Maybe you do a lot of like the Cisco stuff. Maybe you're doing that Cisco, the CCNA cyber ops class. Focus on maybe like network specific breaches or network specific threats. You can use, RSS feeds. There's tons of websites. I post a lot on LinkedIn. And honestly, I go to conferences a lot. And that also helps me because you'll go to like something like DEF CON and people are presenting things that haven't even been released to the vendor as far as like a vulnerability or like a threat. So networking is a big thing because you'd be amazed at who knows what, like just in your little circle. And then of course, things like this, network with me, please. But just continuing to kind of grow that circle because everyone knows something is really the best advice I can give you.
All right. Do you ever present to young women?
I would love to do that more. I've done it a few times, but yeah, happy to do that. So if you want to connect with me, please do. All
right, Richard, do you see anything?
There's another question there from Leilani, and you mentioned a lot of certs that you acquired over your time. What's the most important IT certs that Leilani should encourage her students to acquire in the community college?
So in community college, I think it's really interesting because you can always get like the A pluses, the N pluses, the security pluses, which having that trifecta is what they call it is super important, especially if you decide you want to work public sector or government. DoD requires Sec Plus, so that does open a lot of doors. If you can do it, those other vendor certs like the Cisco Academy, the Palo Alto Academies, I'm sure there's more because there's so many of them out there. I would say if you know that your students want to go stay into like network security, Cisco or Palo Alto. If they want to be pen testers, if they want to be ethical hackers, I want to say CEH because the government still asks for it, but there's other pen testing certifications that are like $200 to get the cert, and they do still lead to jobs. But what I'll challenge you to do is have with your students, of course, look at some job postings and see what they're asking for, because something I recently noticed is how different the requirements are compared to when I first got in. They're asking for weird certs and things like that. So the hard part, of course, is being in academia, updating curriculum, making those changes to evolve based on the needs of the market. But happy to also network with you and brainstorm that a little bit, because I just recently made some changes with my students at Boise State and my Sac City students to kind of accommodate that. So always happy to kind of chit chat about that too.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sure Cisco's happy to hear your shout out to them. This is their 25th anniversary. That's part of the reason we're celebrating.
That's awesome.
25 years of the Cisco Academy. There is a question from Laura Chappell, who says, what's your typical day at Google like? I wonder maybe Laura's trying to get over there too.
Oh, well, so Google is super weird. I'll just be honest. Like the first day I started, I just had a couple of onboarding things and stuff like that. But my job is really to herd cats. And I mean that as lovingly as possible, because I basically sit at the same level as sales leadership. But again, I'm networking with managers and talking to senior customer engineers and kind of asking and hearing like, hey, what do you need from a learning perspective? Because we're starting from scratch. But like this morning, I had a meeting with my colleague in Ireland, and I had a cup of coffee with my cute little Dino Google mug that I got over the holiday. And now I'm talking to you guys, and I'll probably go back and work on some of my own learning because it's my Learning Friday, as I like to schedule. But I spent a lot of time just meeting people and figuring out who is which connection point where. So when we're building this stuff out, I know who to ask. Now, when I get to go to the office, let me just tell you that food is off the hook. And yes, it is true. We get free meals at Google. That is 100% factual. Like I had couscous on like a Tuesday, and usually like if I'm going to have couscous or something like that would be considered like outside the norm, it would be like, I'd have to fly back to SF or something. But they have amazing food and all that kind of stuff, but the culture's great. I'm really happy. Like I don't have any complaints at all. So, but it does depend on your role. I'll put it to you that way.
Hey,
Great,
Ashley,
thank
I love your Learning Fridays. That just, keeps that in perspective. You got to keep going. There was a question from Denise Moss. Do you participate in cybersecurity competitions like the National Cyber League?
I did, and I'm not allowed to anymore because I've been in cybersecurity officially too long to still like compete and be on the leaderboard. But I always do like try hack me. I do NCL. I tried to do the collegiate defense competition, but I guess I wasn't eligible, even though I was a full-time student, because I was already working at Palo Alto. So they have weird rules if you're working for like a big vendor or like a big security provider. It's like not fair. But I was like a trainer, like I wasn't like some scary hacker or anything. But I do try to like help participate, at least from like a mentorship, and I'll try to volunteer and stuff with those, even though I can't participate. It's okay. I like seeing how smart and scary everyone is at the same time.
Richard, you got
There is
anything?
a pretty lengthy question. We have a couple of minutes at this point. We might have to end with this one. This is from Brad, who's a high school teacher. He says, Ashley, I teach at a high school and we have our own network and data center. We are running vSphere with full AD, and we are starting to branch out into security. We recently added Wazoo to monitor our network. And I want to get more into cybersecurity side of things. What do you recommend that I add to the program that would be beneficial to his high school students?
My favorite answer to this, I was ready to go. So I'm going to put it in the chat for everybody. So I love Security Onion because it's free and it uses a lot of the tools and a lot of the backend infrastructure that some of the bigger companies use, and it's open source. This is a great way because it does the log collecting. You can do like the analysis. It has endpoint collection tools. You can set up kind of like a monitoring node. But if you can get this running in kind of your program, I think this would be a great addition to anything that you're currently doing. And of course, please feel free to connect with me because I have a big list, but we don't have enough time to go through the big list, but that's the main one.
And then
Great, that's great. Did you get that? You got that, Brad, right? Okay, he says, cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
There is one more. I think we've got another minute. Do you deal with the quantum team at Google?
They're like a myth to me because there's 200,000 people at Google. I actually know someone on the team, but I don't get to deal with them directly, sadly.
Well, this has been a fantastic, Ashley. What a great story. And we're always thrilled when we have our community college graduates come on and tell their stories. And most of the instructors here are from the community college. Most of our attendees, that's what this conference is for. So,
Awesome.
so thank you so much. What a great story. And there might be additional questions. We can email them to you if you don't mind. And
not a problem.
That'd be great. So thank you so much.
Of course.
Wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to get right into our second and last keynote for the conference, Peter Coffey. And I can't think of any better way to end our morning keynote addresses than by hearing from Peter, our frequent contributor. He's the VP of Strategic Research at Salesforce, and Peter has his fingers on the pulse of tech and as always has a great way of uncovering and describing the future. And although we've been celebrating yesterday and today and tomorrow, as an ICT educator, I really want to hear about tomorrow. It's my great pleasure for the fourth time to introduce Peter Coffey. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm mindful of the obligation that comes with the compliment of being invited back, every other year, because anything I said 2 years ago is subject to verification, refutation, or maybe extension and amplification. And I did take your theme for this year of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I thought, really the opportunity is to look at what might have been considered magic yesterday, high tech today, but quickly become just part of the background in which we live. Try to remember, a world before iPhone and realize the extent to which that was completely transformative until it became essentially just invisible, just part of the environment in which we live. But the adventures that these things enable are now really the opportunity to really focus. And I think some of the things we were hearing during the past half hour indicate that the things that were the subject matter of conversation years ago are now just the foundation for the really more interesting challenges that they make possible. I want to do a brief thought experiment with you, which is just to say, finger snap. In that instant, the present became the past, and you could say, well, yeah, but the future became the present, except that no, that's already the past now too. It's why I tend to resist the label of futurist that's often hung on me, because if you're not a futurist, I don't know what you are. You're either a pastist, which means you are at best an historian and at worst a mere archivist, or you're a presentist, which means you've got the memory of a goldfish. The need to be anticipating the future has never been greater than it is today. And there's just one example that was just a few months after the last time I spoke with you, when in a single moment, I was able to show people that 4 days earlier, people had been warned that it was going to take a week or longer to get that boat out of the Suez Canal. And so people were diverting tankers around the tip of Africa at considerable expense in time and money 2 days ago, except that an hour ago, they said, oops, canal's open. The speed with which situations change is so much greater than it used to be that our whole approach to thinking about what the future even is the future next year or is the future tomorrow afternoon? And this is something that McKinsey's been pointing out, that in general, our information flows have not kept up with this velocity of events. People are getting reports on their desks that are already out of date. That's one of the challenges. The other one is the challenge of exponential growth. Bill Gates at the beginning of the pandemic said, if something is doubling every 2 weeks and you take 2 months to anticipate and deal with and to identify and deal with the situation, well, that's 4 doubling periods. And that means that the problem is going to be 16 times worse than if you had acted immediately. That is
Peter, are you sharing your screen? Do you want to share your screen?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, we didn't get the screen share. I am so sorry.
That's all right.
I said I would take care of all of that, and that didn't happen. You know what? Because the visuals actually do matter, I'm just going to get back to there and do a quick reprise, because it would be a shame to lose that. So thank you, Richard. I'm so glad you caught that and said something about it. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, that's great.
Great. All right. Well, fortunately, you caught it early enough that if you don't mind, I am just going to do a quick recap of what you weren't seeing. This is where things get interesting. Where as I said, the canal issue was 4 days ago it's going to take a week. 2 days ago people are moving the boats. An hour ago the canal's already free. And then McKinsey is pointing out that this is the problem. that information flow doesn't get you the information when you still need to make the decision, and that exponential growth overwhelms us. You're about to see a slide that you've seen from me 2 years ago and also 4 years ago, but every time I feel I need to point it out again because we are psychologically and culturally able to deal with S-curves. We gather our resources, we identify our requirements, we push forward, do the big bang deployment, and then we say, oh, now we can relax a little while, get used to this new state of affairs. Except that no, the new state of affairs you've arrived at now is one of continuous movement, but even that green curve is too conservative. It's linear growth. Actual exponential growth, like the amount of memory in your iPhone, like the number of people using Uber or Airbnb, like any number of measures of our lives, is that red curve at the right. And if you're at that point of divergence, where the people writing the checks want to say, okay, now show us what we get for our money, and the people on the green curve are saying, well, actually, what we have to do now is deal with ongoing change, and you're that lonely voice out on the red curve saying, no, what you need to understand is this is continuous acceleration now and into the indefinite future, that you'd better be well equipped for that. Now, here's an example I could not have offered you 2 years ago, because this is something that just happened in January of last year when the JW Space Telescope got out there, and we went from pictures like that from the Hubble, which were considered utterly extraordinary images when they happened, to images like this from the Webb telescope, which, as you can see, is both far more detailed, far more rich in underlying data, but not obvious in looking at those pictures, and maybe the most important thing, which is that the data capacity of getting things off of that spacecraft is so much greater that now you can shoot the image that you had planned for months to capture, and then you can study the background around it and say, hey, wait a minute, we weren't looking for that, but that looks really interesting. And as one of the researchers said, from now on, we do stuff like this before breakfast. We've never before been able to use a scarce resource like a deep space telescope in this kind of ad hoc, oh, that looks interesting, let's go take a look at that kind of way. They had to plan the research programs weeks and months in advance because the scarcity of the capacity to take image off of the spacecraft was so constraining. And now we can do this exploratory science, and it's not just the same thing done faster. It's a different character of investigation, discovery, exploration, and evolving the definition of what it is we're trying to find out. And that change in the character of science and of other fields of inquiry and art and creation is one of the most important aspects of this future that we're trying to discuss today. Now, I did show you this 2 years ago when we talked about, and someone was already asking Ashley, well, what about quantum? And we were already talking as long as almost 3 years ago about how the advent of quantum computing was going to make many existing security protocols essentially, Swiss cheese wrapped in tin foil, that the ability to attack what had been until now robust algorithms of encryption was going to make them essentially irrelevant. Well, as of last year, it is now generally accepted that threat actors are capturing encrypted data streams, confident that within a few years, they will have the quantum hardware and algorithms available to crack those things. And you'll find out something 2 years later, but if you wanted to keep it secret for 10 years, that's a problem. And researchers in France are essentially saying, look, this is no longer a physics problem. This is no longer a scientific question of can we do quantum computing? It's an engineering problem of how soon can we do it at what scale, to the point that the federal government is warning all agencies that they should be acting today on the assumption that by 2035, this is a new acronym, cryptanalytically relevant quantum computer, or CRIC, to mitigate quantum risk. This is as literal an example as I can offer you of the need to live in the future. You need to be functioning today as if the future of 2035 is tomorrow. because there are decisions you need to be making, technologies you need to be evaluating and deploying, and crucially, new behaviors that you need to be introducing into organizations today if you do not want to find yourself in a dangerously and expensively reactive situation in the next, say, 10 or 12 years. Now, it might seem like, oh yeah, everybody knows exponential growth, everything happens faster. There are some fun examples. It took this long to get flush toilets in everybody's houses between 1860 and sometime around 1980 something. And it took a lot less time to get cell phones into their hands. Okay, but there's another aspect that isn't often given the same amount of attention, and it's this. Take a look at landline phones. They took a while to get established, but now they're actually on the decline. This is something that's less often discussed. And as Peter Drucker put it, if you want to do something new, you have to stop doing something old. Organizations actually get something like a dopamine rush from trying something fun and new. But if you only have 15% refuseniks in the organization, you say, I'm not comfortable with that. That 15% or even 5% of a culture can knock 90% of the value of an innovation out of the rest of the organization. Imagine if every time you sent out an email that was supposed to be, something that people would know within an hour, you also had to wait for the distribution of the paper version of that news to all the people who just don't like email. Imagine what that would do to the overall tempo and richness and interactiveness of your operations. That last 5% that has not stopped doing the old thing can have a devastating impact on everybody else. And the reason that matters is that the past 3 years, there's been a lot of pain, and I don't mean to minimize it, associated with pandemic, associated with war, associated with economic disruption. But in many ways, they were a warm-up act. If you talk to epidemiologists, for example, about the COVID virus, they'll say, this was a relatively non-lethal virus compared to some. The latest strain, XBB 1.5, is demonstrating how much worse it can get with its antibody escape behaviors and its contagiousness. And you can look across the board. The IMF's World Uncertainty Index, Federal Reserve Board Geopolitical Risk Index note that this particular set of data was compiled before the Ukraine war got underway. So I think we can agree geopolitical risk turned out to be even greater than they thought. Cyber breaches, Ashley, can tell you that the intensity and sophistication of cyber threat is still on the rise, and climate related. This is no longer a hypothetical. This is something that is clearly a thing. The frequency, severity, and departure from past patterns of behavior that are leading to real impacts on everything from raising our food to getting hard drives from factories in Thailand. Every sector, every institution of society needs to be asking and answering the question and undertaking behavior change to deal with this reality of needing to decarbonize the economy, to change practices in agriculture, manufacturing. Many people are not aware that the process of making and building things out of concrete is one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters. We need to change construction practices. All of these things need to happen. And again, this is a case where you have to live as if 2030 is tomorrow. These are things that we should have been doing 10 years ago. Well, I don't have the time machine handy. Doing them tomorrow is the best thing we can possibly do. And the challenge that arises from this is that, as Peter Drucker said, every time we want to do something new, we have to stop doing something old. Well, that old thing is someone's culture, is someone's skill set, is someone's means of livelihood. And now, instead of introducing an unmixed blessing, transistors, replacing glass vacuum tubes, no one had a problem with that. They were cheaper, used less power, lasted longer. That was an unmixed blessing. Let's talk about some, shall we say, mixed blessings. For example, electric cars. People love the idea of electric cars. Clean, quiet, easier to maintain. What's not to like? Well, if you're mining lithium in the Chilean desert and you are building massive battery factories in Hungary, the environmental impacts associated with making those batteries are substantial. We're talking about big industrial plants with significant waste products. We're talking about messing up the groundwater and the air quality in vast reaches of South America. And then there's also a geopolitical angle, because it turns out a lot of the world's cheap and easy to get lithium is already pretty much locked up by China. And their ability to own large fractions of the world's battery capacity is already pretty much a done deal. And the paradox has been described as, if you want an electric car so that you can clean up the planet, great, but you'll be driving through stretches of Wyoming that have been dug up to get the lithium for the batteries for your car. There are no longer unmixed blessings available. Everything is going to involve a negotiation. Let me give you another one. That's an example of how wicked problems can surprise us. Is it great that more people are living longer after their initial diagnosis of cancer? It's wonderful. It absolutely is. But a cancer survivor is a different kind of patient from someone who has never had cancer. They're immune compromised, they have other comorbidities, and the dramatic improvement in cancer therapies is also a huge growth in the number of these cancer survivors who are complicated and costly patients to support, and they're living for decades. I'm not saying that more people should be allowed to die of cancer. I am saying that we need to anticipate these second order and third order effects of creating new things and the interaction of these different disciplines. Electric vehicles, is that an engineering task? Is that a natural resources issue? Is that a geopolitical question? Yes, yes, and yes. Now, it's interesting because in 1968, in his novel Stand on Zanzibar, fiction, although it reads like prognostication, it was set in the year 2010. It's astonishingly accurate for something written in 68. John Brunner has a company advertising for workers and saying, well, what do we mean by general? What we mean, if you're interested in any of these, you can read it carefully and you'll see they got A through Z as the names of various specialties. And then at the end say, well, we didn't miss your specialty, we just didn't have room for it. That was what people thought in the late 1960s, that we were going to have this explosion of deep, focused expertise in so many different fascinating areas. We had an explosion of college syllabi. We had an explosion in the number of professional certifications you might get. Every institution I know is now offering micromaster's degrees in any number of areas. And that intensification and fragmentation and specialization was thought to be the way things were going to have to be. But oddly, in the very same year that Brunner wrote Stand on Zanzibar, Sir Arthur Clarke, may he rest in peace, was writing the book-length version of 2001. As he said at the time, very few authors get to write their book while a major motion picture is simultaneously being made from their idea. So he got to have some interesting chances to visualize what he was thinking in a way that most people don't. And his character, the Dave Bowman character who winds up going through interesting transformations at the end of the movie, is described in the book as having refused to specialize, as having troubled his professors by insisting on taking a master's in general astronautics, which would deprive him of ever being in the top ranks of his field, by refusing to specialize. But today, that decision to be multifold in your knowledge, to know many things that you can combine in interesting ways, leads us to stories like this 8th grader who built a Watson-powered chatbot, who was able to take advantage of the discoverability of knowledge in any number of areas, including Salesforce's own Trailhead, including community colleges, including any number of places where she was able to create and synthesize a number of areas of expertise to produce something really interesting and useful without the benefit of traditional institutional support. Now, I want to emphasize something. you will sometimes hear this phrase digital natives used as if anyone under the age of 30 is somehow magically endowed with these powers. Not only is that not true, it may even be the opposite of true, because we are already encountering college instructors saying that their students come in wanting to major in a field like computer science or maybe security, and they've grown up in a world of magic black glass. Once the iPhone came out in 2007, instead of people having their first exposure to computers on something that asks them when you turn it on, what do you want to program me to do today? Instead, effectively ask them, what do you want to look at that someone else did today? It was a completely different initial exposure to what computer technology does for you. It used to be you turned it on, the first thing you got was a basic language prompt waiting for you to write a program. And now it's a web browser inviting you to go look at what other people have been putting on TikTok. And I don't mean to overgeneralize this, but we do have educators saying that they ask students a question like, well, where did you save your file? Not only do they not know the answer, they don't know what a file is, literally. They have never been exposed to the need to manipulate the file system directly. They've been, if anything, over abstracted. We talk about abstraction as creating more power to manipulate technology. But if you don't have the underlying foundations, then you are just kind of floating on a sea of things that you don't even know exist. What this means is that subject matter expertise alone is not enough. What we need to be doing is building interactors. We need to be building people who have collaboration intelligence, context intelligence, data intelligence, and process intelligence. This is a taxonomy that I stole from a Tech Republic article. I steal from the best. This idea that rather than driving subject matter knowledge into heads, we need to be building the muscles of discovery and collaboration, not only with other people, but interestingly, even with machine intelligence. Machine intelligence does not replace people nearly as well as it augments them. This is a fascinating example from, of all things, America's Cup yacht racing, where initially, with these new boats that are basically a hull with wings, and as soon as they're moving at any reasonable speed, the wings lift the hull out of the water. At that point, you're almost flying immediately above the surface of the water instead of sailing in any traditional way. Let's just say this enables some new tactics for competitive sailing. So they built a simulator in which the world's most elite and proficient crews could test new tactics. But then they had the idea of letting the simulator run against copies of itself. And novel strategies emerged. And the next thing you know, the sailors are studying the simulator instead of merely using the simulator as a test bed for themselves. This interaction between what people do and what machines do, instead of reviewing either of them as in competition with the other, is fascinating. And at the same time, it also eliminates another thing, which is that knowing stuff is harder than thinking. In 1955, when the discipline of artificial intelligence was first even named, people thought, well, the hard parts are logic and inference. If we can get that right, we'll have general machine intelligence very soon. And within 20 years, people were saying, oh my gosh, common sense knowledge turns out to be far more difficult than logic and inference and the other things that you actually can write code to do. And this is an example where IBM has been working with people to build an autonomous vehicle that can sail across the ocean with no human involvement. And they're discovering that to do that, you need a database of millions of images of things that float so that you can make decisions about what to dodge and what to run away from and what to ignore and just sail right through in different lighting, in different weather. And we are still working on grasping what it means to be able to sail across the ocean and know what's what when you see it. And we're teaching people machine learning models, we're teaching them all sorts of things, but the problem is there's a lot of cheap data out there that will give you spurious correlations if you let an algorithm do that for you. This is one of my favorite websites, Spurious Correlations, where, for example, the number of non-commercial space launches correlates with the number of sociology doctorates. I don't think either of those is a predictor of the other. I don't think having more sociology PhDs leads to more launches, but correlation can be persuasive. And you need people who are going to be vigorous skeptics and can reason back all the way to, in their field, the equivalent of the underlying file system. Say, no, I'm sorry. I don't believe there's predictive power here. I'm willing to investigate, but I'm not going to be overwhelmed by the strength of your correlation. Apple is a great example of this too. When they wanted to put fall detection into the Apple Watch, they studied people falling, thousands of people over a period of years, so that they could actually characterize what does actually happen to the data coming off of a device when someone falls, as opposed to being on a roller coaster, as opposed to any number of other spurious incidents that might trigger a fall detection. And if you get enough of those false positives, people just stop thinking the feature is useful at all. I said the future is useful at all. Maybe that's a Freudian slip. Now, what happens when people have access to the power, but are also grounded in the basic physical reality? You get stories like this. An Afghan all-girls robotics team designing a ventilator to treat coronavirus patients. I see stories like this, and it makes me feel like I've never actually done anything difficult in my entire life. When you think about being in an environment where a group of girls getting together to do something other than cook and have babies is a challenge all by itself. I mean, the social pressures mitigating against them being able to do this at all are such a huge wall to get over. And then they do something like this. This is so inspiring to me. And every year at about the same time that I do this with you folks, I'm in the applicant interview season for my alma mater, and I'm meeting the students coming out of high schools today and seeing the challenges they've overcome over the last few years. It's extraordinary. The challenges that educators are facing in this environment, likewise, it's so exciting. But remember, I said I was going to talk about magic. People today do expect an experience that feels like magic. And if you want an example of the difference of one versus the other, there's an Apple Watch. It ain't magic. You have to know about updates. You have to know about occasionally, maybe even rebooting things. It's definitely technology. What's magic? Magic is a Casio G-Shock. It's solar powered. You never charge the battery. It's radio synchronized. You don't even have to reset it for daylight time. It will survive any physical environment that doesn't kill you. If your watch is broken, you probably have a broken arm as well. That is something that feels like magic. And Arthur Clarke, who we've talked about before, once propounded Clarke's third law: any technology distinguishable from magic, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which Barry Gem did a very simple logical transformation and said, well, doesn't it follow? Any technology distinguishable from magic is insufficiently advanced. And people do feel today, if it doesn't feel like magic, then you didn't work hard enough. I don't want to have to read the manual. I don't want to have to administer the device. That's why PCs gave way to things like iPads and phones to a large extent. Except that, as Dr. Strange warned us, the warnings come after the spells. Magic is wonderful, but you'd better keep reading for the several pages after the magic spells to see what warnings go with them, because there are warnings on people's minds today. What do they want? They want external engagement. They want customer experience. But to achieve that, we need to be nurturing talent and dealing with people with expectations of a work from anywhere flexibility that they did not expect to get pre-pandemic. The evolving interactions of the partnerships and the customer interests. I've alluded to these wicked problems in which we need to be bringing specialists together from what might have been considered quite separate disciplines a few years ago to work actively together to solve these problems, and do all of this, as we've just been reminded in the half hour previous to me, in an environment where data custody is now an enormously sensitive thing. If I make a mistake with transactional data, I can solve that. If I have a money problem, I can offer to write you a check. If I have a logistics problem, I can offer to ship you a replacement product or unit. But if I compromise lifestyle data, health data, other personal information, those worms can't be put back into the can. There's a term called Streisand effect. You can look it up, about what happens when someone complains about a breach of personal data, and it actually makes people go look harder, say, oh, that might be interesting, and you actually magnify the problem rather than correcting it. Finally, the age of education no longer ends in the late teens and early 20s. The median age of a college student today is already in the mid-20s. If you look at a community college, you'll find huge fractions of students who are active employed, active caregivers, maybe caregiving for older parents and or younger children. Their need to have education as part of their life and not just as a larval stage of their life has never been as great as it is today, especially when you look at how long we're going to be living and working. You're going to go through the equivalent of many cycles of education. And as McKinsey has said, elderhood is now furtherhood. The opportunity to have multiple careers, the necessity to acquire multiple skill sets over that time is going to be so much a thing. And it reminds me of another great science fiction quote from Larry Niven, when a character sees something that makes him say, I'm just gonna have to live forever. How else do I get to see all that there is to see? Or as Robert Heinlein put it, hey, I'm not even 100 yet. And the degree to which 60 is the new 30 is a reality, just as real as quantum computing, just as real as climate change. All of these things are tremendously exciting, tremendously challenging, and our educators are really the ones who have to make that all happen. Thank you so much for the chance to be with you again.
Well, thank you, Peter, again. It's for a great talk, and you've heard a lot of conversation in the chat, and there are lots of questions there. I'm not sure we only have a couple minutes.
I'm at your disposal.
Is there anything there that is a burning question that maybe Peter can answer right now?
I'm Pete Coffey at Salesforce.com, and I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. It wouldn't be considered an imposition if someone wants to reach out to me through either of those channels afterwards. If there's a question, they'd welcome a chance to explore.
Great, that's wonderful, Peter. Thank you so much. Great to have you back again. See you in a couple of years.
At your discretion. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, everybody.